Well, thank you, Professor Hausman, for this kind introduction. I didn't really expect to speak today. I expected to moderate this panel, but I'm very pleased that I had an opportunity to address you in this forum. It is a real privilege to speak here at the Center for International Development, and this is my first speaking engagement after I stepped down from the post of President of the UN General Assembly for its 67th session. I am now an MP in the Serbian Parliament, and one thing that Professor Hausman didn't mention, because it's a very, very novel development, is that last week I set up a think tank in Belgrade, which is called the Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development. And I set it up in a hope that I may continue working in the same field that I spent most of my time working in New York as President of the General Assembly. And I must admit that I didn't really expect that this was going to be my main focus, but my election to the post of the President of the General Assembly coincided with Rio +20 conference, which was very big, as I'm sure you all know. It gathered the world leaders, all the world leaders. All the member states were represented at a very high level, most of them at the level of presidents or prime ministers. And the main conclusion of the Rio +20 conference was that the new development agenda for the United Nations, the one that is supposed to replace the Millennium Development Goals and the Millennium Development Agenda agreed on during the Millennium Summit in 2000 in the UN, that the mandate for setting up this agenda is going to go to the General Assembly of the United Nations. Now, that's a very different way of deciding and working on the agenda if you want to compare it to the Millennium Development Agenda, to the Millennium Development Goals. The Millennium Development Goals were not developed by member states. It was not a member states-driven process. And this time around, we are having a potentially very difficult and unruly process. In other words, to have a parliament of nations. And we all know that parliaments are not easy places, not even in very, functioning democracies. And can you imagine the 193 member states, one being North Korea and the other being US, and then Iran and Israel, and people who have very different points of view and worldviews in many respects. They're all members in this parliament, and there are 193 of them. And in the end of the day, they need to reach a consensus on the new development agenda in less than 800 days. 800 years might be more realistic, as a matter of fact, for them to agree on. But we have about 800 days in the UN to come to an agreement on this agenda. So what I did in the last year, what was my job in the last year as President of the General Assembly, was to set up mechanisms for negotiation, because you can't negotiate in a plenary. And it wasn't so easy to pull, but at the end of the day, we came up with a structure that, let's say, hold some hope of the world coming to an agreement in 800 days from now on what the post-2015 development agenda should look like. Now, talking about the development agenda itself, one of the things that the world leaders agreed on in Rio is that this time around it is going to be, in a way, a 3D challenge. Not only a 1D challenge, the main dimension of measurement being the economic parameters, but actually that what is going to make the development of mankind sustainable in the 21st century is basically concurrently taking into the account other two critical dimensions. One is environmental, protecting environment and making sure that we don't destroy the planet in the process of pushing for economic development. And the third dimension being social, so that the continued or accelerated development does not exacerbate social situations inside a country or amongst different nations. So basically, we're talking about sustainable development for the post-2015 world being three-dimensional, the dimensions being economic, social, and environmental. And a set of goals needs to be agreed on. What will hopefully going to replace the Millennium Development Goals, because the Millennium Development Goals are about to expire, I would like to underline once again, in the year 2015. And what is going to come in their place is going to be decided by the member states of the United Nations. And one significant document that I hope will help them put their heads together was produced by the so-called high-level panel of eminent persons that the Secretary General of the United Nations selected. It was comprised of presidents of Indonesia, Liberia, and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and that provided the Secretary General with a report on how this may look like, the post-2015 development agenda. The Secretary General has read it. He produced his own report that went to the member states on this. I had a privilege to preside over a session where the President of Indonesia, on behalf of the high-level panel, actually presented the findings of the high-level panel to the General Assembly. And I can tell you, I was really watching very closely the faces of representatives of member states, ambassadors of member states. And let me put it this way. Not everybody did come across as being fully on top of the issue. And well, since I'm no longer president of the General Assembly, so I may speak a little bit more free. So few of them had a clue what the report was about. And they had to report to their capitals about it. I reported to my capital on what was this thing about. I received no feedback. And then when I came home to Serbia a couple of weeks ago, I sat down with the President and the Prime Minister, and I said to them, well, now, what is going to be Serbia's position within the open working group that Serbia helped set up so that this is negotiated? And they asked, what open working group? And Serbia was presiding in New York over this. So we're not the best organized country in the world, I have to admit. But we're perhaps not the worst organized country in the world either. So I guess there may be a number of other countries that are still not aware of the enormity of the task that their representatives will have to carry out in New York in only 800 days from now. Having looked into some of the complexities of the matter, I am prepared to say that this is possibly the most difficult challenge of multilateral diplomacy in history of mankind, to be able to agree, 193 member states, to be able to agree in a few hundreds of days on what this development agenda should look like and what are going to be the new measures. How are we going to define the new measures? We had the MDGs. They were pretty simple. They were pretty few. They were pretty powerful. In the opinion of most people, including myself, they were pretty successful. But this is a new era. We are facing a new set of challenges. It's a little bit more of a complicated world than the one that we had back then in the year 2000 for a number of reasons and in a number of ways. And therefore, I feel this is a very timely discussion. I feel very privileged to be able to, first of all, address you and then moderate this group of distinguished individuals who know much more about sustainable development and development in general than I ever will. I happen to be in the middle of this diplomatic conundrum. It landed in my lap as the President of the General Assembly, this whole issue of setting up the negotiations mechanism. And along the way, I learned a thing or two. But now we're going to have a privilege to hear from people who know much more than a thing or two. And the first person that we are going to have is actually the person who was the principal author of the report that I discussed a second ago, report issued by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's high-level panel on the post-2015 development agenda, Homi Karas of the Brookings Institution. It was presented to the GA by one of its co-chairs, as I said, President Yudo Yono, on May 30th, 2013, and it is going to serve as a guide to the UN member states. How much they're going to take out of it, is everybody going to find it attractive? What is there in that report? There is no better person than Homi himself. He's, as I said, senior fellow and deputy director at the Brookings Institution. He's a deputy director for the Global Economy and Development Program and a former chief economist in the East Asia and Pacific region.